Welcome back to another episode of Mailbag Monday, where Chris and I are answering all of your marketing, data, and AI questions. This week, Amanda asked, where would you recommend getting started for learning better prompt generation? Chris, I'm going to turn this squarely over to you because this is you're over here. This is your wheelhouse. Let's say aside from saying, Chris, do it for me. Where would someone who doesn't have a Chris Penn on their team, where do they get started?
So I actually should have just made you do this because here's the secret.
Okay, I'm ready.
The secret is a user story.
Oh, user stories. Love a user story.
The user story, when you're thinking about what you want to do with AI, think about writing out a user story. As a marketing director, I want to build a list of job titles and companies from these job listings so that I can put them in my newsletter. That tells you a lot about what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing about how large language models work. They are composed of basically big libraries of probabilities. That's all they are. It's just tables and tables of probabilities. The world's biggest Excel spreadsheet, all just probabilities. And the more relevant words you put in your prompt, the better the tool works because it has more probabilities to connect to. Let's say we wanted to write a blog post about SaaS, actually B2B influencer marketing. So let's actually do this. I'm going to go ahead and fire up our good friend here, ChatGPT, which is, I'm going to use the 3.5 model, which is the base model. If I write an outline for B2B influencer marketing, this is a really generic, short prompt. There's so few words for the tool to clamp onto that what it's going to do is it's going to create a very bland, generic set of pieces of content. And so when we're thinking about creating better prompts, we have to start thinking to ourselves, well, what is that user story? What is it that you want to be able to say? What is the purpose of the prompt that you're doing? If you're writing a blog post, an ebook, a talk, those are things that you might want to put in. So let's say, write an outline for a 30-minute presentation on B2B influencer marketing. The talk will specifically be about how B2B influencer marketing works, what channels work best for B2B influencer marketing, how much a B2B influencer marketing program costs on average, what kinds of influencers to work with, criteria for recruiting influencers, what to avoid in influencers, and how to measure B2B influencer marketing. Now
before you hit go on that prompt, I just want to acknowledge that the outline that ChatGPT gave you is fairly extensive. It wasn't just 3 bullet points. And so there's definitely going to be some rewriting in this outline, but it gave you a decent amount of information to work with. If you kept your prompt that basic, this at least is a decent starting point. It's not specific, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's not like returning clown car results and things. You know, it didn't put up a picture of Kim Kardashian. It definitely did. There's enough just in the phrase alone, B2B influencer marketing, that is somewhat specific, that it was able to narrow down some of those probabilities. But now if we give it a much more thorough prompt with more terms, we now are going to start narrowing things down. So again, this goes back to that user story. If you are trying to we both went to put up at the same time. If we're trying to build a presentation, as a influencer marketing manager, I want to present an explanation about B2B influencer marketing to my stakeholders so that they endorse the program. Now I have, with that prompt, I'm getting much better results this time through because I've taken the time. And you can, even here, I'm going to take this previous prompt. The purpose of the presentation is to convince executive stakeholders to approve budget and resources for an influencer marketing pilot program in our company. Even things like putting chunks of the user story in here will help structure the presentation, right? So the answer to Amanda's question really is you get started by thoroughly explaining what it is that you want the tool to do. Think of it like a creative brief, right? You would never just hand a designer saying, hey, make me an outline for influencer marketing talk. They'd be like, could you be a little more specific than that?
I think it's really smart to always give the prompt a purpose. So it's not enough to just say, write an outline for B2B marketing, influencer, whatever. It's write an outline for B2B influencer marketing because I need to justify an influencer marketing program to my, board members, manager, whatever. And so having that purpose in every prompt is going to give you a lot more specificity and focus to what you're getting back. And it's going to cut down on the amount of time that you're rewriting and regenerating and ultimately costing money to run these prompts.
Exactly. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is each platform is different. So prompts that work well with, say, ChatGPT may not work as well with Bing or Bard or GPT for all, etc. However, the general rule of thumb is the more relevant words, the better. If you want a specific prompt sheet for the ChatGPT system, we have one. Go to trustinsights.ai/prompt sheet. You can download that. It's absolutely no cost, no forms to fill out, nothing. Just download the PDF, and that will help you structure prompts really well. You can also just use the user stories that we were talking about earlier. You can write that out as well. But that's how I would suggest getting started with prompt generation. It's in some ways it's a little bit like SEO, where you think about what are the relevant words and phrases that you would use to get a good search result. The same thing is true for a prompt. What are the relevant words and phrases that you would use to convince a good designer, a good writer, to how to write exactly the content you want, because that's what these tools are. They're like junior level employees. So you got to be specific and clear and detailed in your requests to them.
See, you talk about SEO, and I think of it as delegation. And so how would you delegate a task to somebody else? You would tell them what it is, why you want them to do it, how you want them to do it. Chris, I want you to write a blog post about B2B influencer marketing for the website that's 500 words long, so that we can get more awareness. And that's how we're going to measure it. And so that translates into a prompt that could go into one of these systems.
Exactly right. So that's the answer to Amanda's question. It is you're leveraging skills you probably already have, like delegation, like writing creative briefs, like doing SEO. This is all just language. The difference is you are talking to a computer, not a human, so you have to be even more specific, even more clear. But if you do that, you will get better results out of pretty much any modern large language model. If you've got prompt questions you want to ask about, or you've got some prompts that maybe you want to share that work super well, and you're allowed to share them, pop on over to our free Slack group. Go to trustinsights.ai/analyticsformarketers, where you and over 3,000 other marketers, all of which are human as far as we know, are asking and answering each other's questions every single day. And to catch up on previous episodes of Mailbag Monday, make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter. Go to trustinsights.ai/newsletter, where we recap our content every week. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.